Hello and welcome back to the Villa View for another very special interview. Today we are at the Holy Land that is Villa Park to interview a real club legend in Brian Little.
Massive club hero, played, managed, pretty much done everything, as I'm sure you'll find out in this interview series. Obviously we've met Brian before, we know what a nice and great guy he is, so it's a pleasure for us to sit down and talk to him. Let's hear what he has to say.
So first of all, you joined Villa as an apprentice in 1969.
Wow.
And obviously you come down from Newcastle. Is it true that Villa signed your brother as well to help you settle in?
Well, I think that's, when you get to know, being in football gives you license to exaggerate little stories. I exaggerate little stories about players from the 70s when I'm talking to fans, or from the 80s, or we have nights out where the lads from that era tell stories about each other. There's all a little bit of a tweak. And that's one of Mr. Ellis's favourite stories, isn't it? So, but to respond, to try and give you some where we're at, one of my favourites ones of Mr. Ellis would be, and the number of times he tells it, I'd be with him in the boardroom and he'd be going, "Do you like my tie?" And they'd go, "Oh, that's nice, Mr. Ellis." "Yes, it cost me £1 million. And they'd go, "What?" "Yes, this is the Helsingborg tie. You can remember losing that game against Helsingborg, Brian? It cost us £1 million losing that game." So I always think when Mr. Ellis tells little stories like that, there's a little twist to it somewhere along the line. Of course, my mum and my dad wanted my brother to join me here. He was a good footballer. And he played, 400 odd games in the league before he was injured and packed in. He played 3 times in the first team with me here. And I think 74, was sold to Southend for £10,000. So he wasn't a bad player. But naturally, of course, my mum and my dad, having two lads who played football, would obviously have wanted them to come to the same place. So I'm not sure how the story goes personally. I'm not sure what the full facts are. But it was good to have my brother with me. And he's younger than me by a year and a bit. But he was a lot tougher than me. He looked after me, which was great. So, he's a decent player. I can still remember playing in the first team with him. He was a lot tougher and rougher than me. But it did help me settle in a lot more. The first few months here for me as a 15-year-old, you're leaving school and leaving home. 15, you look back, it doesn't happen very often nowadays, does it not, leaving home at 15. I have a 15-year-old son now, and I have 2 grown-up sons, but when I look back to them at being at 15, wow, there's no way I'd have wanted them to leave home. So it was better for me to have my brother around, I guess. And my second year here, coming on to 17, I was starting to get in the first team. And my first year was a bit of a quiet time for me. I came as a young midfield player, eventually became not a striker as such, someone who played off a main striker. So I settled in a lot better with him around me, without a doubt.
So obviously you moved to Birmingham at a very young age, and that's not the way it is in the modern game. Would that be a totally different experience now in the modern game compared to what it was like then? Yeah,
because ironically, on Sunday of this last week, I was up at Cooksey Lane, King's Standing.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter, yeah.
And that was our training, one of our training facilities. And you look at it compared to how the game has moved on today, and there's me 15 training with men, Andy Lockhead and there was all sorts of, when I look back, John Dunn and all of these lads who were 6'4", and you're 15 and yet you do pre-season with them. We had to do the same running as them. We did the same, we competed against them. It was really quite frightening. And I know I went back to my digs in Boldmere every night, absolutely shattered. Had to go straight to bed, had a little bit to eat, straight to bed. Because at 15, those sort of things weren't thought about. You just got thrown in there. There was 17 apprentices that year, most of them the same age as me, all exactly the same. Training with men, playing football with men, running with men. And that was just the way it was. It was physically very, very demanding and in many ways quite frightening, I guess, as well, Certainly that first few months for me, it was pretty tough, yeah. But looking back, it was brilliant. I remember Arthur Cox was the first team coach. I was terrified of Arthur. He used to shout, and whatever he said, I did, but as you settled in, you got used to all of those sort of things, and you'd have the senior players. If you ran too fast, was shouting, "Now you get back behind me, son! Don't you dare go past me!" And you were when they said things to you, you reacted. It was. Nowadays we've gone to the other extreme, whereby 15 stay with 15-year-olds, 16 stay with 16-year-olds, 17 stay with 17-year-olds. I'm not sure whether there's a happy medium, to be honest. I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
Because looking back on reflection, at 15, I grew up very quickly. I remember my first trip back home. I'd been here 3 months, and I had changed so much. I went back to my school, up to school, because some of the lads and girls had stayed on to do GC or whatever they were, A-level. I can't remember what it was in those days. Different to what it is today. And I was so different to them. I was a million miles different to them. I'd changed so much. I didn't realise how much I'd changed. In fact, I was still very nervous and quite quiet here, but back home I was a different animal to all the other kids I'd left at school. So you had to grow up. You had to grow up very quickly.
So your first proper season at Villa was obviously one of the worst campaigns going, with Villa being relegated to the third division. What was the atmosphere like then? How did you cope with that, obviously being so young as well, the fact that they dropped basically like a stone?
Yeah, it was unreal. Tommy Docherty was the manager and expected to do well to start with. Arthur Cox was his coach. Even at youth team level, we had Graham Leggett, who was my first coach, who then halfway through the season went off to America, and then Frank Upton came in. So it was really, it's so difficult to remember incidents. I can remember watching the team play, and I can still see us winning a couple of games 4-1 in the season and thinking, oh, that's it, we've cracked it, but we never did, and it got worse the whole time. We were very lightweight at the time, the team, and it was a difficult period. What I remember most would be not that season, in fairness. It would be, and I often talk about this now to people around the ground, I witnessed that once it had hit the bottom, I witnessed that revival, and all I can remember is the season after and the season after that, where we'd play the likes of Bournemouth here with 50,000 people in the ground, and the game was on Match of the Day somehow, and also and Ted McDougall scoring dive and header, but Andy Lockett and I think it was Jeff Bowden who scored the winning goals. It was incredible games. The comeback, I remember, that first year is still a bit of a blur in my life. In fact, I was sitting here in one of these rooms last weekend. I came to see a guy called Bobby Glaze, who was apprentice with me the first year. I've seen Bobby once in 46 years. He was having a tour around the ground, and the club asked if I would pop down. They knew he was coming. His son had spoken at the club. So I came down and sat with Bobby for an hour and a half in one of these rooms, reminiscing of that first season. He got released at the end of the season. He's still a massive Villa fan, lives in the area. His 2 boys come to him, they've got season tickets. And we sat here and reminisced for an hour and a half the other day with the lad who I knew 46 years ago, who I've kept in touch with, but not by seeing him, so to speak. So those are the sort of things that come back to me more about the lads themselves who were apprentices with me, and how they've sort of disappeared in many respects. It was the second year where we got a group of lads together as apprentices that sort of went along with the first team as well. And there was some fantastic... The recovery here at Villa Park from 70-71 onwards was just immense, and it was great to be involved in that. And somehow, from being a young kid a year or so before, I was actually starting to get involved with that first team, with massive crowds, great atmosphere. Add to that a fantastic youth team run, which we had 20-odd thousand watching the youth team week in the FA Youth Cup games. So all of a sudden, yes, I was here when the club had its biggest downfall, but then to be part of that revival, which is, I guess that sort of overtook all of the memories that were ever there about the first season when it was all wrong, and it's very difficult to remember too much, because as a kid I think I was a little bit, not starstruck, it was just overwhelmed by it all, to be honest.
Vic Rowe was your first boss, and it often goes unmentioned. How was he to play for? Obviously, you reached a League Cup final in 1970-71 season.
Yeah, Vic was a really decent fella. He'd been off to America, he'd come back. He was really good to me. He was good to the likes of Jimmy Brown, who, lots of people don't know of Jimmy Brown of the era, but Jimmy Brown was in the first team at 15 and a half. He's the youngest ever captain of Aston Villa at 17. Scottish schoolboy international. He was apprentice with me. And so he looked after lads like that. I was around the first team. I travelled with the first team an awful lot, but never played. But Jimmy was in the first team. So Vic opened the door to try to bring some of the youngsters through who we could see had talent. Again, he, whilst he was part of that first revival stage, getting out of Division 3 as it was in those days, when we got out, it wasn't long before he moved on and Ron Saunders came in. But Vic was great to me. He was brilliant to the likes of Jimmy Brown as well, who, again, when I look back at that, and we had a young lad of 15 playing first team football, and not many people know his name, I think that's pretty much a crime, to be honest. He was Scottish schoolboy international, Scottish youth international, destined to be something incredibly fantastic, but at 20 got a few injuries and never quite progressed. Moved to, I think he went to Preston from here. But when you're at a club and one of your apprentices is playing in the first team, it's a great tonic for you. It's a great a great thing for all the apprentices to sort of strive to. But Vic was very instrumental in settling things down. He was a very calm person. Although one or two people said there was a wilder side to him, which I never really saw as a young lad. I think that was kept to the senior boys more than anything else. So Vic played his part without a doubt. Settled the club down from what was a difficult period, put a team together that started to perform on the pitch, and laid the foundation for probably where we are again today.
So you really found your feet in the 1974-75 season under Ron Saunders. Yeah. What was it about him in particular that got the best out of you? Was it just everything else that pieced together alongside him?
Yeah, I guess this is where we get not controversial, but I understand now. I'm 63, so I understand why he was like he was with me now. But it took me till I was in my 40s before I understood what he was doing to get the best out of me. He used to just wind me up all the time, and I was the sort who would respond. I'm not a loud person, me, but I'm not one who does things that I don't agree with. And Ron just seemed to, I've heard this story about John Gregory with my club suit. That's been passed on to me. But I was the only person whose club suit didn't fit him, And I think Ron Saunders, we had them made to measure, but somehow my suit was twice as big as it should have been. And I look back at it now, and I know he's done that on purpose. I do, I know. If he hasn't, then I'm gutted, because I think that's his way of winding me up. He'll think, I'll have him, the little so-and-so, I'll sort him out. And that was his way of motivating me. Everything I did, he'd question, what are you doing that for? And I just couldn't help. And then, but I was awkward. I always was picked first in the 5-a-side, 6-a-side, 7-a-side, 8-a-side. But if you run up a hill carrying somebody, I wouldn't do that. Why am I carrying someone? I'm not carrying anyone up a hill. I couldn't see the logic in carrying someone up a hill. So I used to get sent in. They used to send me in. But I still, to this day, don't. I would never, but when I became a football manager, I'm moving on a million times.
It's fine.
I'd never ask anyone to do something I wouldn't do myself. That was one of my biggest principles. Because I didn't believe in certain things were going to make me a better footballer or anyone else. Now, I was the only one who would spout up, because I was young and daft and a bit bullshit, I guess. But I don't know where that came from, because I was never I'm not really like that now, to be honest. But when I played football, I think a lot of people didn't realise that I was one of those people. When I went home at night and I was playing the next day, I genuinely dreamt about football. I genuinely wanted to make whoever was playing against me think, who the hell is that? So I'm a real football nut, and I don't think people realised it in them days, because I used to say, I'm not doing that. I had an opinion on things which, if it's good or bad, I don't know. I've actually apologised to Ron Saunders 2 or 3 years back, but he took no notice of me, to be honest. So I just said, I've actually realised some of the things you did. Not so much carrying people up a hill, but some of these motivational things, some of his training methods. I found as a football manager, I used to do a lot of things that Ron Saunders did, and you know, him and I used to clash every day. So as a football player, I don't know where it came from. There was just this growing up thing happened very quickly in me, and this belief about how to play the game. And as I've said, the biggest thing that I still don't understand to this day is how many people from all those years ago would come up to me and say, how did you become a football manager? But I genuinely thought about football day in and day out, how to become better. If I saw a football player who was better than me, I went home and I thought about how he played, and could I do that? Yeah, I could do that, but I could also do that as well. So I was a lot deeper than people thought I was, you know. But it came out in the sort of way that wound certainly Ron Saunders up, wound a few of my teammates up. But I just stood up for what I believed in, and I've took that with me all my life. I've always tried to do what I thought was right. I've always tried to ask people to do things that I think was right. I've never asked people to do things that I wouldn't do myself. That's been my biggest principle, and I learned that from Ron Saunders. Was so far ahead of himself. We had a fitness coach, which was unheard of. You know, the manager had a coach. The manager did everything, and he brought in this. But he was a weightlifter, and everything he wanted to do was weight-lift and make your body better. Well, I used to just say, I'm not lifting weights. I don't want to lift weights. And I hated lifting weights. And as it turned out, one of the reasons was when I was a little bit older, and when I actually failed my medical, when he tried to sell me to Birmingham, I failed my medical because I had a back condition, and I hated lifting things, and I always felt that it was hurting me. So sticking up for what I believed in probably kept me from retiring earlier, in all fairness. I had major surgery on my back when I was 40-year-old. My back collapsed completely. So perhaps some of the things I objected to was because it wasn't right for my body.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know whether I was awkward. Yeah, no, I do know I was awkward. But I didn't feel that I was awkward over things that were right, you know. I certainly wouldn't, if he said to me, Brian, next time the ball comes to you, I don't mind if you flick it over your head. I don't mind if you try and not make the goalkeeper. But he'd never say that to me, but I would try and do that. I took a penalty here once, right on half-time, at the Holt end. We were playing Oldham, I'd scored 2, and he's in the dugout, and I can hear him shouting, don't let him have that penalty. I could hear him from the sideline. It's right on half-time, and I tried to nutmeg the goalkeeper.
For a penalty?
Yeah, and missed. And he just hammered me. He hammered me from walking from the Holt end, because the whistle went straight away. I'd scored 2. We ended up winning 6-0, and I scored a hat-trick in the second half, sort of thing, you know what I mean? But he hammered me, but I could hear him. Don't let him, he knew I would do something silly. So I learned from that as well. I also took that on board. And you know, I had moments where I would say to people, especially people like Dwight York, I've done that, Dwight, but I'd like you to do this. You know, and I took a lot of things that I did right and wrong, and passed that on to players. But I mean, Ron and I were just, I'd love to think we could get on now, but I don't think he has any time for me. You know? He doesn't forgive very easily. But he was he was so far ahead of himself. It was untrue.
Did he ever give you any prize? Because John, when we spoke to John, he said that he never got any prize off Ron Saunders at all. Did he give you a prize?
There was a chosen few. Okay. But then that was because he felt they probably needed that, you know. I mean, again, when you become a coach or a manager later on, when you're a football player, you're in a little bubble. You live in a even in our era, you know, the modern player must be so hard for them, you know, because you do live in this little bubble, and you're protected from all sorts. You know, I mean, as a football player, the day I retired and had to retire early, I went out into the big world and I didn't know what day it was. You know, because I was used to ringing the reception here. My tooth's sore, will you get a dentist for me? You know, my leg's sore, can I go and see the club doctor? This is that, I need that. You know, my house door's broken, can Ted, the maintenance man, come and fix it? You know, absolutely, you're in a bubble. You don't know what goes on in the big world. You know, there's a lot of things that happen which keep you probably as not as well educated as you need to be about things. I think we're very fortunate. I was very fortunate, but you know, you had to grow up differently when you come out of it, and you had to adjust differently. And I did so many things when I was a young footballer, and John would say this, that, and the other about me, which was probably true. But you know, at the time, you don't realise what's going on. You're just in your own little world.
So you only ever actually got one England cap. Is that sort of like something to look back on in pride? You managed to get one, or do you wish you'd have managed to get more caps?
When I look back at the England thing, I actually played for England before the likes of Trevor Francis, who was my biggest sort of rival, Tony Woodcock, who was a similar type of player to me. And I got in the England team before those guys. So I was 21, which in those days was young to get in an England team. So I played for England when I was 21, but that next season, within half a dozen games of the season, I did my knee and I missed pretty much the whole of the season with just a cartilage operation. I mean, I had a cartilage operation. I was in a plaster cast for 10 weeks, you know what I mean, which is like, you look at it now, you go in, you come out the same day and you go and walk straight away sort of thing. So I was in plaster for 10 weeks. I never played again that season until the end. And by the end of that season, Trevor had had his chance, Tony Woodcock had had his chance, and I never quite got another shout. So I was a little bit unfortunate in terms of picking up an injury. But I think after that year of recovery, the season 77-ish, I think Andy Gray, myself were playing by then. I think, you know, John Dean was part of it as well. And John, Andy and myself scored something like 70 odd goals between us. You could probably tell me, I don't know, but you know, Andy was touching the 30 mark. I was definitely mid-20s, and Dixie Dean would have been around the 20 mark. And I genuinely thought then that I would have a chance, but I never got selected. So disappointed that at that point. I think disappointed to have, you know, finished high up in the first division as it was then. Disappointed that, you know, we had an incredible team and I did as well as I probably could have done in terms of goal scoring. On top of that goal scoring, I think even Andy, by his own admission, would say I probably helped him get a fair few of his goals as well. So I think I had an exceptional season that season, which never got me back in the England team. So, but I think the reason basically was that I got injured at an important time, and to be honest, the likes of Trevor Francis and Woodcock and them who were playing at the time were good players. You know, they were good players. So it was just a little bit unfortunate for me, really. He just said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, I want a Capri 3-litre gear. He went, Capri 3-litre gear. He wrote it down. And I'm not going into figures, but he said, how much money do you want? I said, well, I want X amount of pounds. He went, X amount of pounds. And I want appearance money. Go back to Villa Park, and all the lads are going, what happened? I went, I got a Capri 3-litre GT. I got this amount of money. I got that appearance. I got this signing on fee. They were all banging on Ron Saunders' door. Everybody loved me on the back of that. When I was 40, it completely collapsed. I had to have my spine fused and a disc removed from my back, which is major surgery. I had a Capri. It got stolen. I remember waking up and looking out at my house one day and it had gone, and they found it in Castle Vale, or half of it in Castle Vale. It had been married to another car or something, they told me, the police said. So, classic. I love those days. 70s are brilliant.
If you enjoyed that video, why not watch another? Click the video choices on screen now to go and watch them in full. Be sure to subscribe to the channel by clicking our logo there on the left. Easy peasy.